It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, sorry, I should have mentioned when I was talking about what we're doing that we have with us John. Yes, John's there in the by video, our auditor. And look, I propose that we deal, for the benefit of John, with his two items first. So I suggest to Ahmed that we deal with item 6.5, which is just the external audit recommendations, and item 6.8, which is the long-term plan update, for which John has given us a draft arrangements letter, obviously not finalised because we've yet to get a fee in ours, but I'd like to deal with that to give John a chance to comment before I think he dives away for the rest of the meeting. So with that, could we please move to item 6.5 on page 37 of the agenda? And Ahmed, I wonder if there's anything you'd like to say about the outstanding recommendations at this stage.
For the external auditor's open recommendations, so we have currently 15 open recommendations. There is no overdue items. The full details in attachment 1 with management comments. There is no new recommendation added since last meeting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ahmed. Can I just check one point of clarification? There are a number of Audit New Zealand updated comments. So they are current comments as in from the existing audit, they have been reviewed?
These comments from last meeting, so there is no further comments have been added since the last meeting.
Yeah, the audit comments have been added, yep. So they are current comments. Okay, cool. John, welcome to the meeting. Was there anything you wanted to note about the recommendations before I throw it over to the committee?
So no new recommendations. It will be a function of that we have not provided the report to the council yet on the 2022-23 audit. We expect to have that with management shortly and hope to finalise it before Christmas.
Brilliant, and that may well remove hopefully some of these from the list, correct?
It may remove some of them, yes.
Thank you. Okay, questions from the committee about the recommendations? Status of them, happy with progress? Just a couple that probably attracted my attention, Ahmed. I raised this in relationship to, well, I both got accounting, but also thinking particularly about the LTP, which is number 4, which is the bottom of page 38 and the start of 39, which is around depreciation rates. And I was just interested to know what the status of that was. Andrea, I see you in the back. You'd be welcome to come and sit at the table for most of the meeting. You'd be welcome to. I just wondered if somebody could explain to me this matter, because I take it that actually it can't be material. We've just had our audit, so presumably our depreciation rates are reasonable. Can I just understand what is the outstanding issue, please? Can somebody explain it?
Through to you, Mr. Chair. I think it's that while the main infrastructure assets are on fair value, there are still some classes of assets, particularly property, buildings in particular, if you like, that sort of property, which remains at its deemed cost value. Yeah. And so that is, so while we've moved the water and roading assets to fair value and everything is now in a straight line, there are classes of assets that still remain. Some classes of assets, gotcha. I think that is the issue that has been. Yeah. Right. Okay, well that will be, okay, so it's a matter of cleaning up more than anything. I mean, I'm wanting to make certain that we are, we literally are only cleaning up territory here. Clearly there can't be something here that's material, otherwise we would have dealt with it for the 22. Well, there is a bit of work because we've still got to get quite a lot of data on various assets to make sure that what goes in has the same sort of quality that we've got inside our infrastructure assets.
Brilliant. And Andrea, now at your table, I didn't have the chance to personally say thank you for your hard yards on the annual report when council met to adopt. I think I did leave a email to that intent, but I'm glad that I'm sure one of the ones that we will move will be recommendation number 5, which is about improvement. I note John's discussion around quality, and I don't think that means in saying that quickly we lacked quality, but that's one thing for us all to work on, and I'll return to that when we come to the program. So thank you for your work as far as that's concerned. Anything else that's come to people's mind while I've been rabbiting on? No? Can we move to the recommendations, please, which is that we receive the report or the update. Do I have a thank you, Peter? Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Thank you very much. Can we move to item 6.8 in the long-term plan? I understand we have Vinci on the line as well. Do we have her? Is she here yet?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I've just been texting Vinci. She's not available for personal reasons at the moment, so myself and the people sat
You're
at the
comfortable to
table.
do that?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
we're fine.
Okay. Oh, look, that's great. Because I would just, I mean, my reason or request, I am interested in the total LTP project number 1, but the other thing was John has finished us with the directional heading of where the LTP audit's going, and I wanted to be able to have a discussion about that with John here. So, Paul, I'll leave it then in your hands with Andrea to talk to the paper, and then I'll invite John to speak to his.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of the report is to note the project plan outline, accept the letter of engagement with Audit New Zealand, although it is in a very draft state and still being negotiated in some ways, you know, Mr. Chair. Accept the self-assessment sent to Audit New Zealand and acknowledge the identified risks for the LTP at this current point in time. So I think the interests will probably lie with the risks, so I might go to that, Mr. Chair, if that's
Brilliant.
all right.
That's indeed probably our core interest. I'll let other people like Nigel worry about the policy decisions, but I'm interested in the progress.
And so just to quickly, I'm not going to read them out, obviously, but I'll just quickly whip through them. The first one being, it is a resource-heavy project. It's one of the biggest projects that we undertake as a council outside of the district plan review. It relies on a lot of expertise, and we are currently using 3 contractors to help deliver that, supported by unit managers and the rest of, and finance and the rest of us. It's a bit of a huge team effort. The bit that sort of overlaps with this particular risk is the fact that we were late with our annual report from the previous year, which had impacts on the annual report. This last one that we've just worked through has put a bit of pressure on the finance team, and that's sort of compounded a little, putting some polish on the numbers that are then available for asset managers and people delivering asset management plans. So that's obviously turned around now that Andrew's back in the fold, and we're starting to make some good progress in that regard. Other risks here, obviously Three Waters will have a significant impact, and we don't really know how that will go, but we'll find out in the next 3 months, I suspect, what the direction will be. But whatever it will be, will place a significant burden on all councils to respond to that new direction. Again, it's affecting most councils, but we are being presented with financial constraints from decisions long ago in relation to funding depreciation at the levels that it possibly should have been depreciated at. We're now trying to catch up, and that's placing some burden on our finances. To offset that, we're hoping that the incoming government may indeed sort of, they've indicated anyway that they will ease lending restrictions for councils, and possibly that ceiling may rise as a consequence, which might be a short-term fix, but I suspect there'll be some conditions attached to that lending up front, which may cause a little bit of pain for councils as we adjust to the new way of funding infrastructure. Community expectations are always high, and they remain high. The level of understanding in the community sometimes can be challenging in terms of the cost to maintain services being a significant increase in rates in the current climate is a hard sell. I think the assumption for many people in the community is that if nothing's changing, there shouldn't be a rates rise or very little. But obviously, at the moment, that isn't the case. And the last risk at the bottom there is our activity managers are quite busy at the moment, and they're facing competing needs for their time. But obviously, the LTP takes priority. So, in a nutshell, there are the risks that we've identified in this report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just before I invite John to speak, Paul, perhaps just one item of clarification, which is relevant to both him and also this. At paragraph 8, and also, well, actually, no, not so much paragraph 11, but at paragraph 8, you have the planned dates with the ranges of delivery at this stage. I mean, you've mentioned the item of risk around staff. That I mean, the ranges are pretty wide, if I can be honest. But broadly speaking, you're still in line. You're not saying to the committee that you are behind schedule.
We might be a couple of weeks behind schedule, but I think we can recover that, and that's what we're doing at the moment. Right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right, John, thank you for being with us. We have your draft letter, obviously had a chance to have a crack at it. Is there anything you'd like to say as we consider it, please?
Right. As you're well aware, LTP is a moving feast, is that with the new government having been formed and the three coalition partners all saying that they were agreed that the affordable waters reforms would be revoked, that creates considerable challenges because they won't be able to pass legislation to do that before Christmas. We don't know when that legislation will go through. What I sent through to the chair and a couple of the senior managers, but you can members of the committee can access it from the Tauranga City Council website. Tauranga decided, because they got commissioners, to actually go and advance their long-term plan, and so they have had their consultation document audited, and legal advice is that you need to comply with the legislation that's enacted. So what they've followed with what Tauranga have followed is that they've got the three waters in for the first 2 years of the LTP, but they have disclosed impacts on what it would do with rates, other revenue costs, capex, if they had the three waters included. But yeah, there is an emphasis, a matter of paragraph in the audit report highlighting that. So just raise that for the committee's attention.
Thank you, John. Right, and we also have behind it the sorry, had you finished, John?
Well, just is there any questions on that? Then I'll just highlight what will be the emphasis in the LTP audit.
Oh, well, please keep going, John. We'll come back to questions once you're finished. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, my mistake. I was a bit quick there.
Sorry, Bruce, can I ask if it's possible to have John larger on the screen so that we can actually see him?
See his face. We want to see the whites of your eye, John.
No, I don't know that will be particularly attractive. But
Yeah, you said it. Okay, this is as large as we can make it, just part of a screen. Are we able to, I mean, we know we're being live broadcast, so that's fine. I'm more interested in that we see the participants in the meeting, if that's possible, please. You can minimise me if you want to.
Okay. So in terms of emphasis, we will be looking at the doability of the capital expenditure program. We will be looking at climate change. Obviously, levels of service, the linking through to what you can debt, how much debt you can service, your compliance with the prudential benchmarks, but also what your local government funding agency requirements. So those will be the key areas of focus.
Thank you, John. Yes, and you have those out clear in terms of the letter. We also have the self-assessment, which is a Timaru Council filled form, which is to be sent to the auditors. I take it that goes today once it's been, or has it gone? I noticed 4 December was the date. It's gone? Brilliant. Okay, well done.
I have it.
Oh, you have it? Oh, there we go, John. That's brilliant. Okay, so folk, we've heard an update around the broad risks to the project. We have a rough sense of the timeline here, and that's also, of course, picked up in John's draft letter on page 77 of our agenda, and we have the self-assessment. Are there any questions folk would like to raise? I appreciate you doing all the policy work behind the scenes or outside of this meeting. Nigel.
Oh, just a comment I note already, the government said this morning that they will repeal before Christmas, so
yeah,
that sorts that all out for us. So I think we're pretty clear in where we are going with Three Waters.
Yeah. Does that, I take it, Andrea, having the numbers for years 2, 3 to 10 is not a problem. We presumably have those for Three Waters?
It's not quite that simple, but we can.
Thank you for the correction, you're quite right. But I mean, is our asset management planning thinking through, and our financial strategy thinking through anyway that period?
Yes, it is. It just, essentially, it's pulling it out, all of the other essential overheads and things like that that would normally be attributed to the water. So there's work to do, essentially, around what that might look like.
Okay, right. Take your point. I know that the numbers in a broad sense are there, but I hear you specific. Yes, B.
Yeah, John, you mentioned before that you will audit to the legislation that is in place. Was that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so if the legislation is repealed but not replaced with anything, presumably we're back to what has been the position previously, that councils will, when you come to audit, govern the Three Waters for the foreseeable future.
Correct.
Sorry, and that was what was behind my question to Andrea about how big it, well, I asked my question expertly, how big a challenge, given the probability of legislative change, is it to now have the last 7 years of Three Waters numbers in the LTP?
We currently have them in there now, so we haven't actually made any decision to take them out at this point.
Oh, okay, right.
So our current model has 10 years.
Yeah.
Water.
So your point
take
was,
it out is a
if you had to take them out, that would be the challenge. Yeah, sorry, I knew I asked my question incorrectly. Okay, so I mean, in a sense, assuming the repeal of legislation goes through, we are in a position where we can just do exactly what you said, go ahead with normal LTP.
Well, where it potentially gets difficult is if the replace legislation arrives sometime around, April, May, or anything after, February to April, May, June sort of stuff, because then your LTP may or may not, who knows, could be at variance with what the legislation requires. And I guess that's speculating, but at the moment all I've heard is that it's proposed to repeal, but I haven't heard what will, and that just winds it back, leaves it as it is, and then it's, what it looks like on the other side we'll only know when the legislation's passed.
Yeah. Andrew, the cavalry coming over the ridge, I think.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to reinforce through the chair that the asset management plans have been prepared basically on that 10-year basis,
Yep.
and we'll be preparing our infrastructure strategies on the 30-year basis. Who actually manages the water doesn't really affect the costs in the project side of things, so we are continuing to do that. I guess another point I'd make is too that the government policy statement of transport is likely to change as well with the new government, so we're going to be faced with amendments there, like probably last minute as usual.
No, thank you for raising that. Actually, that's a really good point, that it's not just Three Waters that the change in government we should look at. Janice?
All of that is every council. It's not unique to Timaru, so some cognizance will have to be brought to that nationally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm not sure if it's for John or Bede. Are there any risks or any issues that are Timaru specific as opposed to the general situation for councils?
Possibly you, Bede,
Well,
first. John may have a comment, but perhaps you first, Bede.
Well, I think the risks that we've elucidated in the paper here are really the ones we've identified, and I would expect that they're probably quite ubiquitous across the country, in that most councils, I think, will be challenged by their community's expectation of what is a fair rate rise against what is needed to fund the work programs, and then having the resourcing and the capacity to actually deliver the work that's required. You've got the likes of RM reform, which is going to, we're told as well, if the papers are correct, is going to be reversed. So I think each council will have its own cadence, if you like, but those risks will be the theme will be pretty consistent, which is, I think, as we've set out here. I can't immediately think of any that present. We've got for instance, on our risk, we've got things like Peel Forest, which we know about, and so on, that have to be managed, but I can't immediately think, and nothing really came through the annual report. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was anything that came to mind, because when I look at it, it's most likely to be the resourcing, the staff turn, etc., which is a specific situation here. Others might face it, but that's the thing that we can control. It's just getting clarity on what we can control and what we can't. There was an observation somewhere in here that we're not charging the full rate amount that we could. Is that true?
It's probably a political conversation, really. So if you look at where we sit as far as councils, and this is from the Taxpayers Union information through to end of June 2022, if you break down provincial councils, we would be the third lowest, and it's not an exact science because councils are offering different suite of services, but we'd be the third lowest out of 23. So if you look at the split between provincial councils, and that's taken out the unitary, there's probably at that point there was the average residential rate was 2,450 through to about 3.5. So there's $1,000 difference roughly across the sector, and so that's the challenge. And if we're at the lower end of that, then actually probably where is the sweet spot, and it's likely to be in the middle somewhere.
And I saw that as potentially a risk in terms of the percentage increase required,
Yeah,
the shock for ratepayers.
It's how you get there and how you have
Yeah.
the conversation. It's a political one ultimately, and it's always been, and that's why we are where we are.
Yes, yeah, I get you, yeah. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions folk would like to raise? I've got a couple if that's okay. Andrew, I just want to go back to paragraph 19.
Excuse me, Mr Chair, I thought John might have been going to say
sorry,
something
John.
just about the
John,
risks. I don't know if he did.
I'll sit back and I'll keep quiet. Thank you, Bede. John, you wanted to make a comment?
Well, self-assessment identifies out a few areas of risk, but they are not, they're fairly typical across councils. Some limitations in reliability of data. So you've got the not having fully funded depreciation, those sorts of items, but there's nothing significant that needs to be highlighted.
Thanks, John. So look, paragraph 19, just wanted to check here, Paul, because it looks like you're actually stating risk has crystallised, which is the turnover in key roles has been a risk. Some institutional knowledge on processes and context around past decisions has left. In other words, we're probably down some staff people. So we've got the contractors in, great, makes a lot of sense, need it. Are we absent information in certain areas?
We are, I think we've hired in that expertise, but we do have a deficit on staff in a couple of key roles. But I think that's symptomatic of the size council we are, where you do have a lot of institutional knowledge in key individuals, and if they move on for whatever the reason, it can be challenging to then rebuild that space. So in the absence of a couple of those key roles being filled, we do have consultants operating to fill that void in terms of sector knowledge and expertise. So the risk is being managed, but obviously best case scenario is we have capable individuals back in those seats as soon as possible.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, Pete.
Yeah, that's right. So, and it's not just in the delivery of the LTP, but we've hired in what we think is pretty experienced resource when you look at it in order to run that specific project, so that it has the advantage. You've actually got people who are dedicated to that project, but I do think we've still got a lot of knowledge sitting in amongst our unit managers in various areas, particularly around water and roading, which are key. In terms of having a lot of institutional knowledge in those areas. And we still also, across some of our other areas, have a good deal of institutional knowledge for other areas. So I think that risk has been, it was identified and it has been probed on more than one occasion, and that was why we've contracted in a pretty experienced team to run it. But noting that while you have some, particularly unit managers, who may not necessarily, and their time is valuable and precious, but they do have a lot of knowledge around things like activity management plans and infrastructure strategies and such like.
Thank you, B. I also note the risks that you've already highlighted, Paul, around funding, which is rates and debt caps, and I think as you've said, Nigel, that's a political decision, but it does actually reflect an important position, which not every council is in, Janice, is that you do have some options. Whether they're palatable or not is probably a political decision. I won't make a comment on that one, Nigel. That's for other people on a higher pay grade than me. So I'll keep out of that one. Just a couple of questions out of the very good self-assessment. Paul, I take it, and I'm looking at page 103, there's a question here which is particularly focused around the performance framework. I'm conscious from getting around the country that, quite rightly, the quality of our performance framework, the systems and what have you that sit behind it, and we've gone through this with the annual audit and FRS 48 and all that sort of stuff, are increasingly under focus. This says, if I've picked it up correctly, we have reviewed our existing performance framework.
We have, Mr. Chair. I don't know, B, can you speak to that more in depth than I'm able to?
Yeah, there has been, and there continues to be a review of the performance framework on the view that particular unit managers have been asked what it is that will make a significant difference in terms of demonstrating the level of service to the community. I suspect what happens is that we find that a number of them probably are somewhat redundant, But that's a decision really for the governing body when presented with it to decide which are the ones they wish to have measured and which are the ones they see as being relevant and important. But if we look at some of them, then putting aside the mandatory ones, which we have to do, but the unit managers are getting challenged, including that sometimes less is more, as they say, that you want a handful of performance measures that might be quite significant and meaningful. So it's a piece of work that is ongoing. It's not complete, but it has been commenced. But in the end, it's for the governing body to decide which are the ones that they see as relevant and important. But we've had some of that discussion through the activity management plans that have occurred already.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. Just my reflection is the need to make certain that whatever we choose as that framework, we have good systems behind to support whatever data might come out.
That's quite important because it's, as we know, for audit, it's that provenance along the audit trail from the raw data through to what is presented in the framework that becomes quite critical in terms of assessment.
Paul, the other point that I focused on in the self-assessments on page 105, which is around climate change. I want to be careful. I'm saying this in front of John. I don't want to be driven entirely by audit, but the Auditor General's Office has made it reasonably plain that they'd expect probably the CD, the consultation document, would deal with climate change. And that perhaps is getting back to your comment, Janice. Is there anything particular that we might be saying in our consultation document around climate change?
I think it's a topic that we're acutely aware of as a council, and we are looking to build it in to our thinking across everything that we do. We have an advisor now who's providing technical advice in that area, and we are trying to identify what we already do, because we already do quite a lot of things that contribute towards reducing our carbon emissions and also mitigation. And so it's about identifying what we do and then pulling it together in a strategy that gives us a practical way of giving effect to it through all our council activities. Council have given us a sort of a steer that they would like a practical sort of approach, so that when Councillor Pye or others may wish to describe the political will, but the feel we seem to be picking up is that it's for not less words, more action, but some meaningful actions that we can actually do that make a difference, rather than say high-level strategies that just go across everything, if that makes sense.
When does that hit? Will that hit this planning cycle?
It will definitely be part of this LTP. It will feature throughout, and John from Audit New Zealand's indicated strongly that will be the case through our annual report. It came through loud and clear that that's what they would be looking for in our LTP. So it is something that we're going to build in and we're aware of.
I mean, I want to stress, even from the podium, I've been known to say we've got to deal with this, regardless of whether it's an audit requirement or not, but I'm just conscious that the two are twinned here, so I pass that one on. John, my final question is actually, if I can go back to your, and I do appreciate your letter, and I'm looking at page 77, which has the audit timing, which is also obviously the timing for Timaru in terms of when it anticipates delivery. Firstly, I'd look your way, Paul. These dates in John's letters are ones that you recognise as well as being the dates that firstly we as Timaru are going to deliver on. This is the hard question. I'm wanting to, my bottom line is I want to know, A, we're all committed, including John, and B, we've all got the resources to do it. So this says the proposed consultation documents available on the 19th of February. Is it?
Vince is a very busy lady, and she has indicated that she will be writing over the Christmas period in order to try and make that deadline. But it is very challenging. But equally, whichever way it moves, it's challenging as well. So if it's later, it compresses later work. If it's earlier, it compresses work to complete, to meet that deadline. So it is just a challenging agenda or schedule to meet the LTP.
So I take it,
No, well, we're like I said, we're probably a couple of weeks behind, if I'm honest, and we're taking steps to catch up. Everybody's working hard. I think we could impress upon some units of council that the sooner that and quicker they can turn around those requests for information, the easier it is on the team. I think the team are finding that challenging. So that's for us as a senior leadership team to impress on the organisation that that's what's expected and that's what needs to happen. So that is taking place. I'm confident we can keep to the timeline, but it is a challenging one. Yep.
thank you. Bede?
But just so parties are aware, that's the consultation document for Audit to do their work on, not to go out to the community. So everyone's aware. I just
Yeah.
yeah. So
Sorry, yeah, look, I'm conscious of that, Bede. Thank you for,
yeah.
for
No, I just
making
wondered
it
whether everyone
clear.
appreciated that.
We're
And
saying that if it's the 19th of February, it means the opinion and document is ready for the 18th of March, which you don't have a lot of leeway past the 18th of March.
no,
You know, in terms of a plan B, let alone, and I'm about to ask John how he's going, and he might want to say something if we're going to be a couple of weeks
Can I
late.
just make a comment, Bruce? And
Yeah.
each LTP, of course, the standards and expectations seem to ramp up,
Yeah,
which is to be expected. The work program, though, that is not vastly different to the last LTP. And in the last LTP, the budget holders or unit managers, who are primarily the budget holders, were required to have their budgets in by Christmas. We are some way ahead of that, in that we will be having our first budget meeting, albeit a workshop, next week. So we are probably, while Paul's saying we're a couple of weeks behind, I don't think we should forget we're about 5 or 6 weeks ahead of where we were at the last LTP. So we have identified that those crunches occur, and so that in actual fact there is, that has been built in, but we are some way ahead because in the past it was that get the budgets in by Christmas. In actual fact, while all the budgets are not yet complete, we have quite a lot of the information and are holding our first workshop, which would normally have been held into the new year.
Brilliant. So, Bede, if I just help me clarify that for me. So is the 5 or 6 weeks built into this 19th of February date? Or is this buffer that you've got to still meet the 19th of February?
I wouldn't really call it buffer, but what I would say is that it's not the time. We're further ahead than where we have been in the past, and that our budgets were presented by Christmas. In actual fact, that was when the unit managers would aim to get them into the finance team. So so what it has done is, I think, provide more time for examination and for a thorough and rigorous testing of the budgets that are coming in, rather than in the past where we've had to work at pace. So, but I think buffer is the wrong word.
Okay.
But it is certainly fair to say, because last time we probably undoubtedly had a deficit. This time, we're actually quite some way ahead. To be putting out a workshop budget in front of councillors this stage is at the beginning of December is quite some difference on
Good.
a positive side to
Oh,
previous
and
years.
look, I take the positivity out of it. Look, Paul, before I invite John to speak, the poor man, he's in the wings here. Clearly, there needs to be a plan B. I would have thought, what happens if we can't meet the 19th? I think one of the things here is that we're dealing with a draft letter, and obviously this will be finalised at some point with the fees. So I suspect somewhere there's going to be a negotiation to get this letter finalised, and clearly we'll need to have definite dates and timing in this letter for when it's finalised, which, well, I'll invite John to tell us when it's going to be finalised, but surely it's going to be done before Christmas. John, is there any comment you'd like to make? You're working to the 19th of February, is that correct?
Yeah, so we're working to the dates that are that you see on page 77. What you have got is that there's a few days contingency is that you can move your council, Timaru can move the council adoption date to, if my memory serves me correctly, the 30th of June's at a weekend next year. So the statutory deadline is actually the first working day in July. So that gives a couple of days. One of the critical things from an audit perspective is the management plans being asset management plans being ready, and the infrastructure strategy being ready, so that we can look at that before Christmas, because that drives so much cost in your budget, and it drives you the vast bulk of the capital expenditure program. We need to get in and have a look at that, do our preliminary work on that before Christmas, or at least in January, because if if we find anything that's wrong in that, then that has a major impact on the process.
Right, thank you for that, John. Andrew, I think, I know you seem to be hiding behind there. I take it from what you said, you're reasonably comfortable at this stage, the asset management plans and presumably the strategy are trucking on. Okay, are they? That's what I took from your prior comments.
We've been focusing on the asset management plans in the first instance, so the infrastructure strategy is probably a little bit behind to where we'd like it to be. And it's just looking at what our long-term needs are, particularly around the water side. Roading is reasonably simple, but yeah, there is an option to narrow the focus of the infrastructure strategy and just stick to the mandatory assets, being roading and the three waters. Yeah,
broadening it out. Yeah. So look, this is the hard thing, and I presume John's got these in here because they're being previously discussed. So asset management plans on the 27th of November, which I won't be rude enough to tell you how many days away is. You're coming? 27th of November?
Yes, we will.
Right, okay, brilliant. Look, thank you. I'm not trying to be facetious here, but we are, you know, this is the problem of the year that we've had, isn't it? 2 annual reports, and I think you've made that point, Paul, which has concentrated us up on this, and yet we're finding another timeline. I don't want to drive this out of audit requirements. I'm more interested that actually we have the right conversation with the community and we strike our rates on the 1st of July appropriately. That's the key thing for us. I think, Paul, I will mean clearly this has got to go through another iteration. We don't have the fee and the hours in here, but that's why. Sorry, you might have looked non-plus when I said you better have a plan B. What I'm trying to reflect is these dates are going to have to be firmed up before the letter is signed, and we need to make certain that they're ones that we're comfortable are reasonably deliverable. Clearly. Yeah, okay. Any other comment from Focus? We have it at this stage. So we'll take it on advice that this is the direction they're heading. John, I think we've had a good discussion around key risks. Thank you for that, Paul, in terms of the actual long-term plans consultation document itself and the self-assessment. We've got a sense that at this stage, this is what John is working to in terms of his own resourcing and being on site, which is fine. Can we move to the recommendations, please, on page 62, that we note the project plan outline. We aren't going to accept the letter of engagement because it's not a letter of engagement. Sorry, I should have, Paul, we need to say we note the draft letter of engagement. Okay? I'm prepared to sponsor that we accept the LTP assessment sent to Audit New Zealand. I think it's good, it's useful to build on, and John's already working on it, which is great. And we acknowledge the identified risks for the LTP at this current point in time. The biggest one being what happens with legislation between now and Christmas, because all of a sudden our assumptions could be quite different. So other than B, which I think is a reasonable result, we note the draft letter of engagement. I'll move from the chair. We pass that as a resolution. Peter, are you seconding that? Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. There being none, oh, sorry, John, you want to say something?
Yeah, so there is meant to be a letter coming out from the Office of the Auditor General this week on the setting of fees.
Yes, but that's not the fee itself, is it?
I can't say what it is, but
Okay.
it might.
John, I'd be honest with you, mate. You're heading for a PR disaster, mate. This is terrible. Okay, that doesn't change the nature of B, which is that we note the draft direction. Thank you, John. Look, and I don't again want to sound like I'm being facetious. It's good that we'll get at least the sense of direction in terms of fee, if not knowing the actual proposed fee for the audit, and we can start negotiating.
So Bruce, what is the process for accepting the fee, et cetera,
Good point.
and signing the engagement letter if we're only just noting the draft? What is the process from here for finalising it?
It's a very good point. I think we need to have another E, please, which would be that I would ask the leave that the committee delegate to me and to the chief executive the ability to recommend the signing, because it's got to be signed by Nigel, to recommend the signing of the engagement letter. Thank you for that. Very good point. So we could add that as an E, please. It's a bit like the annual report, the need, because we don't meet, I think, until something in March. We need an interim arrangement so the committee can actually process that. Peter, are you happy with that amendment to add that? Brilliant. Thank you, Janice. Good thinking. We're going to sleep at the wheel. Okay, is there anything else we need to discuss? Can I put those motions, please? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Brilliant. We're a small crowd. I need to hear your voices, please. That's great. Okay, look, thank you for that, John. We'll go back to the original thing. I noticed probably I should have dealt with 6.6, but I'm assuming I know it's reasonably straightforward. So if you need to move off, I understand that. So thank you for being with us this morning. That's really helpful, and thank you for your letter. I find that very helpful too, to go into the Christmas break knowing at least something about the direction. With that, folk, can we please move us back to 6.1, which is the work program of the committee for the year. Ahmed, anything you'd like to say to this?
So that's the audit program. There will be no change from the last meeting. So we just added one column for October 24, and the report to be presented during this meeting.
Thank you. Okay, any questions or comments folk would like to make? Ahmed, just a couple. And I won't try and elaborate too much in terms of detail because I probably should give you what's on my page. I'm actually wondering in our March meeting whether in fact we might have scope either for a workshop on the insurance renewal or to have our brokers with us at the meeting for a briefing. I'll leave that as an open thought on the basis that actually increasingly placing insurance is difficult in the current market. We have a big asset base, and I would be interested to know before we place the insurance what's the situation, what's the current context. I mean, I've got councils that are anticipating increases in excesses, minimising what they do, self-insurance, the whole range of things, and I think it would be useful if we held some form of updating the committee on our risks and actually how we propose to cover those. So we could note that, please.
Just on that, Bruce, it would be helpful if there was provided a paper in advance of that workshop on various options and what others are doing around it, so that we can get our heads in the game.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope that makes sense. So if we could have that, please. When it comes to the LTP, I'm reasonably relaxed as to how we have it. On March 24, we've got the audit plan and engagement letter, so that will only be affirming or confirming what hopefully we have done before Christmas Bede, in terms of recommending Nigel sign. So I would just like us to have a placeholder in March and June, which again is very similar to our paper today. What are the risks? What's the project plan? What are our risks? Are we delivering on time? So if we could have that, please. Andrea, I promised something around the annual report. This year for the 22-23, we did really well. You did really well. And I think it was partly also because in front of the committee, we had firstly a pro forma and then secondly a draft before we got to the final. So I'd like to suggest on the June one, we have a view of the pro forma, and perhaps we can have a discussion close to the time what may or may not be in that, please. And on the September 24, I would presume we might at least see draft financials. You can tell me what is the right date for that, and if we've got to move dates, we'll move it. But I'd like us to do that because I just want to take on board the comments of John that we support Andrea in terms of the quality check. We know we'll produce it. Very keen that we actually put forward something that we're comfortable meets the quality. So if we could add that to that column. And look, the other thing that is broader and bigger is that in June, it would be an appropriate time, Ahmed, for us to have a workshop on refreshing our risk profile. And in particular, I would be very keen that we do that within the context of even if it's proposed, because it probably would be at that stage, our proposed long-term plan. I note again from within the self-assessment, you've done some good work around strategic priorities in each of the activities. That's tremendous. I just really want to endorse that. Let's look at what might stop us achieving those strategic priorities. That becomes our real risk profile. So I'd like to suggest that we need to, in June, consider a workshop for the committee, and indeed I'd want to invite all councillors to that we do a risk refresh. Okay, that's probably in more detail than I anticipated, but I just want to give you an indication that we need to just stiffen up a wee bit around the program. Any other comments while I've been speaking that people would like to raise? Meet your thoughts, Janice, again, your experience elsewhere.
I'm happy with the workshop coming in June because I think there'll be more certainty around the change in political emphasis from the government as well. Mm. No, I think those are the key things. That there's some chunky stuff coming at us.
Yeah, I think there is. Okay, can I, from the chair, move this? Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Michelle. I'll put the motion that we, with those updates or amendments, we receive and note the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Can we deal with the open action items? Yes, open action items, please. Ahmed?
The action points from last meeting, we have 6 open action points. The first point was about the strategic risk management update. So this will be follow-up in March meeting. And the last 2 points, point internal audit report in point 5 and point 6, this last 2 points can be closed. Point number 4 about the protective disclosure policy. So the policy was approved by the SLT last week. Andre, if you want to have any question about this policy.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, so we've got 6 items, as you say. I think you're recommending the last 2 be closed, and you note that there's been positive action on 4. Any other comments from, yes, Michelle?
I just have a question about Action 3, the credit rating update. It said that it was due in November 2023, and I just wondered what the status of that is, because I'd find that useful information as we think about the
with the LTP.
Plan.
Yeah, good point.
I guess with the credit rating, we had feedback after the last meeting. There was an email sent to David Walker who responded with some information, and then we asked Mr. Chair whether or not he would like that circulated, and I don't think we heard back from...
Oh, okay, from me. I'm the problem. Oh, I had an apology. No, or, sorry, who's David Walker?
So David Walker is Band Corp, so one of our
okay.
Treasury advisors. So
Right, okay.
essentially, there was a report written in October last year, which I think was brought to the committee. And then essentially last meeting, it was requested an update in regards to that. So as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a lot of change from that, but there was a table in regards to other councils. So we can circulate that after this meeting
Oh,
if you
please
would
do.
like.
Yeah, well,
Yep.
in that case, we can treat that as closed. My apologies, I hadn't, Andrea, apologies if I'd overlooked an email. Unfortunately, I'm not unknown to do that, so my mistake. Yes, please just circulate it. I think, Michelle, your point's well made. You'd like to know that as you go into the continuing your LTP discussions. It's really important. Okay, any other comments folk would like to raise? Being none, can I have a mover and a seconder that we receive the update, please? Thank you, Peter. Thank you, thank you. I'll second it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Right, Ahmed, can we move on to 6.3, please, which is the strategic risk update. Thank you for the action taken to include the detail and the background. That's been very enlightening, and I do appreciate that. So, in your hands.
For strategic risk, we have 12 strategic risks. There is no changes from last report, since we are reviewing during this report time the process of the risks. There will be a report to be presented to the LT this week about risk management improvement plan, and this will come to the ARC meeting in March. For request from the ARC for the full list of the strategic risk, which is an attachment 1, and we have shown here if you have any question on these risks.
Brilliant, appreciate that. Folk, John, you've come to the table. Is there a comment you need to make?
In case there were any questions that Art couldn't answer on the process, how we arrived,
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, folk, we got questions for Ahmed or indeed John here over the strategic risk framework? Yes, Michelle. And then Janice, thank you.
I actually have a few questions, but I'll start with, I know we just talked about a workshop for full council on this, but it worries me that we've identified some things in here as very high risk, and perhaps they might not flow through to the LTP if full council don't have full visibility of this. For example, we've identified climate change as our highest risk, and I'm not sure that we are, I'm not saying we aren't, I'm just not sure that we are giving that our full attention in the LTP. It's actually not a question, more a general comment.
More a statement, yeah. No, it's a fair point. Sorry, did you have more questions? I think you said you had a few. Seriously, I'd encourage you to raise them all.
Just
do you want to follow it up?
Just following through that thought, Michelle, how do these risks go through to council? What comes from, I've asked this before and I can't remember the answer, I'm sorry, but what goes from this meeting to council? Because there's no point this committee doing this work if full council doesn't get the benefit of some of the risks.
So, look, through you, Mr. Chair, actually it's a good question, and it's probably ad hoc, to be honest, in that it appears, rather than this report coming up saying it's gone through the ARC committee and been vetted by them, it probably comes ad hoc when we, for instance, put a paper up and we talk about a climate change strategy, we start to address the issues there. Or through reports, say the financial reports that go up on a regular basis. So I don't think it doesn't get bundled up, if you like, as a tidy package that says, here's the risk register. And I think actually it's probably an action point that it come up after the next council meeting, that it get presented to council so that they too can test it.
Because most boards would certainly annually, semi-annually see the risk register so that there's an awareness and that there can be a discussion around that. So it just seems, the councillors may have a view on what you'd like to see.
Well, let's keep with our climate change, because I think, Michelle, you raise a good point. And that's where I found the value of the additional information that you've provided, Ahmed, so I appreciate that. But I think it does also reference back to our LTP discussion as well. So I was looking at things like that grouping of partially effective, and that's interesting because that's not necessarily partially completed. It's actually, even if it's completed, it's only potentially partially effective in its value. There's things like the network resilient maintenance, the Canterbury Regional Climate Change, the infrastructure strategy, relationships, activity management plans, coastal inundation working group. They all seem really important to understanding better, and actually more importantly to meet what I think has been, if I've got it correct, Michelle, the driving force that council wants to see something practical. So the question that interested me, and I endorse your point about actually if this is highest risk, and these are some of the areas that these are effectively our controls that we're building in. That's why I go back to the point, what's the estate going to be? Are they going to raise, A, the effectiveness, and B, our ability to contribute into the LTP? May not be an easy question in the sense of an immediate answer, but I think this is the value of actually seeing this is actually, well, we've got the answer. Is it going to be delivered? That's really what I'm getting to. Yeah, Peter?
I was just going to talk to it from the perspective of what this translates into an LTP, because this is basically saying that our risk is very high, that we haven't met some triggers that we see we're required to do. So the risk is that we haven't met them, but it doesn't say what the risk is. The risk, because in terms of the philosophy of climate change, and I know where Councillor Pye is mentioning, the council hasn't fallen directly with some very vocal people on there as to what we think our philosophy is for climate change, let alone the direction we're going. So this risk to me is the high risk of we're just saying that we haven't done those. If the reports are all done and everything's met, it drops away what? Our risk of what? Of someone saying we've met a philosophical benchmark or an international benchmark, or it's a big issue, and if you put that before the council, by God, there'd be a hell of a discussion. And I don't think, but we do need this directly fed into us, in the way it is, and an understanding for what that is, what the evolution of it is.
I think the mere existence, by the way, of infrastructure strategy, because, I mean, what that description are mitigations or controls. So in the presence of the risk being named and there being a description and source and cause, this is our response. It doesn't mean to say the response is overall, in the long run, effective, okay? Because after all, we're trying to do something which is going to prevent or avoid or reduce our exposure to this risk. That still has to come. I think what this is reflecting, there is still quite a level of work which leaves us in a heightened risk position because we haven't finalised it. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, because I think you've hinted, Peter, it's a big task. But it does go back to Michelle's point that until we have got this and we know the controls worked effectively, we are in a risk position, and the question becomes, Janice's then, does council know that? Yes, John.
And I add, Mr Chair, that you're not the only council in this position when it comes to climate strategy, because it's very new, and we still don't know what the new government's going to do with the climate change strategy direction. So it will stay here for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think equally, John, I'm just trying to push this a bit harder, because that's actually the core of Michelle's questions, that actually it is saying that this will influence key documents that we are preparing for our plan, and that actually becomes really important, that we, again, it's the pressure that we've got in the coming couple of months' speed.
Yeah, no, I think you made the point that I think I was going to make, is that in a number of these documents are measures, if you like, if you look at the infrastructure strategy and in the AMPs, that address some of those risks to the infrastructure arising from climate change. So that's the, I suppose, what you're looking at is actually what are the measures in there that will demonstrate or evidence that there is some plan to mitigate or adapt against the effects of climate change through both, and AMPS and infrastructure strategy are key documents in that regard. And so too is actually the financial strategy, I expect, because it tells you something of how you're going to fund it.
Thanks, Pete. So look, I think we've dealt with this through the self-assessment and the LTP, Paul. I'm looking your way because you're holding the stick around the LTP for us here in this meeting. But this is just now tying in what we're saying is our highest risk or unmitigated risk relative to our total risk profile. So it will be interesting to see, particularly by the time we get to March, has this changed? Because if it hasn't changed, we've got problems with our LTP to boot. So I just would like to reflect that. We haven't quite dealt with the issue, Michelle or Janice, how do we say this to council? And perhaps we'll talk about that later on. Okay, any other, Michelle, you had a range of questions, I think you said, so I'm very keen that you have your chance.
So just on the next point on significant hazards, I wondered where in here do we include doing something about our earthquake-prone buildings come into play? Because to me, I mean, it's been identified as a hazard, but I'm guessing it's in somewhere in an infrastructure plan or something like that, but I couldn't really see it on the key mitigations there. And in that same area, also I wondered why the floodplain management is ineffective.
To you, Mr Chair. So the AF8 is dealt through CDM preparedness, which is mitigation 2 down there. Your other question in relation to?
So sorry, just on that, but that's preparedness for a disaster, but where is the proactive, let's do something about our earthquake-prone buildings?
Okay.
Through you, Mr Chair. Councillor Pye, we've got, we have done a number of initiatives in that area, as I know you're aware, through City Town, with some of the work that's happening there, workshops that we've put in place for people to attend. We've tried to work with building owners to get them to understand the solution as well as their liabilities. And we are compliant with the legislation at the moment. I think the bigger question you might be asking is what's our strategy for our own buildings, is it? Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about the district?
No, I'm just saying that mitigation, all of that work you've described, doesn't seem to be a mitigation in this risk management plan, whereas I thought it should be.
Yeah.
It's not reflected. Yeah, all the work that's been done is not reflected in here. That I can see.
That's a good point.
I think we're saying it should. John, the other one was, and it interested me too, the floodplain management plan is an ineffective control. Really?
Yes. That's my understanding through Andrew, also in conjunction with management.
Thanks, Andrew.
So yeah, the floodplain management plan is still being worked on. That's why it's considered ineffective. We haven't got it up and running. We're doing a lot of the behind scenes with the modelling and working very closely with ECAN on that. They do the rivers and when we do the streams. So that's we need to combine the two together and come up with a cohesive model that can map those floodplains.
So would that be better as not implemented?
So I need to explain how this process works, especially for the new councillors that weren't here last year when it was first developed. So there's 3 stages to this process. There's 3 questions that are asked. Has it been developed? Has it been implemented? So it's either yes, yes, or yes, no, no, yes. And then the third part of the question, how effective is it? and that has a rating from 0 to 100, and a discussion with the respective risk owners. At this stage, it's more of subjective call until a measure's put in place. So yes, the model has been developed, has been implemented, but it's still being worked on. That's why it's ineffective, because it's got a rating of around 30%, recognising there's more work. So partially it's from 40 to 70% effective, 18 above is effective and fully effective.
Okay, I think there probably needs to be a little footer explaining that, because the document needs to stand alone in terms of understanding, because some of the questions I had were around, okay, so it's only partially effective, what are we doing about these? The ineffective ones, why are we bothering to continue? So without that explanation, the words, well, they have different meaning to what was intended.
Yes, and I was conflating implemented with effectiveness as well, which is a different story too, in a way. It might be good, even if we take it as on advice that you said that we don't necessarily, it's perhaps shooting the breeze more, but to have that column with the percentages on in terms of the assessed effectiveness might be quite good, as in contrast to whether the control is implemented or not implemented, or partially, or not implemented at all, which would still like that idea rather than effective, because it suggests that we're doing nothing.
Effective has specific meaning in our minds.
Yeah, it actually
Yeah, so in the context of the way this was developed,
the negative.
yeah, so the way this was developed was, it was for a purpose to help those business units identify where they need to focus effort with those mitigations.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to flood. Oh, we're going to get. Sorry, was there a comment? Sorry, felt like there was a comment coming from you two guys. No, not at all. Okay, so we need to just think on that terminology. Seriously, the model might say the word is ineffective. I don't know whether the model's right then if that's the case. Can we look at, and we need to note the earthquake-prone building initiatives that have been occurring, Paul, as being part of the control, and we can assess whether it's effective or not. Good. Michelle, you have more questions?
And then I just had a few questions around the personnel and the wellbeing strategies, and there's a number of them that have not been implemented, and maybe your explanation just explains that a little bit, but that's a concern to me when that's resourcing has been such an issue, and we're a bit lagging in implementing some of those strategies that would help address that.
Is there any comments on that? That's exactly my questions, Michelle. Well done. You've been reading my notes.
So, and Andrea McAllister here, who's the acting, may be able to talk a little bit more. One of the things about the binary nature of this is that there's a number of work streams going on underneath that represent what will occur once the strategy is done. So what we've got, and we had this debate with John, was even though some of those strategies and work streams are occurring, because there's not a strategy, for instance, in place, it's just shown in a binary sense, it's not there. So in a way, it sort of overstates the risk and understates the mitigations that are in place. But I guess in a chart like this, it's quite difficult to represent without then getting told, because the counter-criticism, if we bring it, is, but if you haven't got your strategy implemented, how then are you representing that it has even partial effectiveness? When in actual fact, some of the work streams are there, and I think from some of our internal surveys, some of those work streams are having a positive effect. I don't know if you want to add anything, Andrea.
I think you've covered exactly what I was going to say. Thanks, Bede. The only other note I'd make is that we do have a draft strategy that has just been completed last week. So I'm hoping in March we'll be able to update you on that. But as Bede said, a lot of those work streams are actually in place. It's just that we don't have the strategy.
Right, so you're talking about both engagement in culture and recruitment.
Yes, we were talking about the wellbeing one, I believe.
Oh, well,
yeah. Yes.
That's
sort
of.
But it's the same.
Bede was talking about the generalities.
Yeah, but it's the same with the employment and recruitment as well. There's work streams in place, it's just that we don't have that strategy.
Right.
Yeah, and the L&D career strategy and pathway, we actually have an increasingly developed set of work streams that enable and identify where learning and development is required, and a pathway for people particularly who want to move up within the organisation when opportunity arises and we see them as having the skills to do so. But again, it's around actually, and John is, I'm just trying to see where that one is, and we had, for instance, yes, it's got not implemented, the strategy is not, but a number of the work streams that would form part of it are already going on. So is it partially? Well, I suppose there's a risk of officers don't want to be seen as trying to overcook and present something that when you'd say, well, where's the strategy? Well, it's not there yet, so it's not complete, it could change as a result. And it's that twilight zone, I suppose, where we would rather undercook than overcook and present a position that might be seen as trying to sort of gloss it up a bit.
Okay, look, and we're having an effective discussion here, Bede. I mean, it is something that from a control perspective, the strategy needs to be in place. I don't want to get into ticking boxes here, but it does, and you've reported faithfully, and we're having a good discussion. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that management isn't inactive in these areas, and in fact, I suspect as you, and let's face it, elsewhere we've heard it, things like with the LTP, people have left. You'd rather have people in place than not. It's only natural then we look at something like your recruitment and your branding and your engagement and culture strategy to say, well, actually, so is this part of the problem? What are let's join up some of the issues that have come up. So I think it's good, faithful reporting, and I appreciate your point about not wanting to overcook it, but equally it's reasonable to ask the question, because otherwise, it's comforting to know that action is taking place, but having said that, it's still worth the question. Yes, Michelle?
Just going to ask, is there room for some commentary on this report where we've not implemented or ineffective, that we have a little bit of commentary there? Because, some of the explanation that we've just heard does help with the understanding.
I think there's two things. One is, Janice already raised this, we need to have the legend or something at the front of it saying what does the colour and the numbers mean. I think that's reasonably straightforward. I think for this, yes, to have some short commentary would be helpful. I mean, it means that we have more to read, but it also means we have a greater focus on really what is one of the key pillars of our committee, which is what are the risks. Janice?
Yeah, I thought the summary and the table was really useful, as evidenced by the discussion that we're having, despite some of the understandings that we've had. So well done on that. It's miles from where it was when I first started. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I was going to comment, Janice, that 12 months ago we had nothing.
Yeah. So it's really good.
And all credit to Bede and his team. They put a lot of effort to where it is now, and with the quarter reviews, they've been held to account where they might have said effective. I've actually challenged it in the past, saying really. Because if an audit had come in, you'd have to show proof that's effective. So it's always been honest and transparent in that process. So 12 months ago to nothing to where we are now, and Arkman's going to pick up the journey from here going forward. I think they've come a long way in 12 months.
And it's really good stuff. There's a lot of information in here that informs us as to what's planned, what's underway, etc. I had one minor thing too that hasn't been covered off in terms of iwi engagement. I wondered where the training in Te Reo and Te Ao Māori might be part of a mitigant or something in there, just something useful to add in as part of the journey on that. But I thought this was a significant step forward to where we'd come from. Well done.
Michelle, do you have any more questions?
I had one last one on the iwi engagement, actually, and being the committee chair, I'll probably take responsibility for some of this, but I wonder how we can have Runanga representative on council committees as effective when they never turn up. And so, yes, we've got the framework, yes, they're part of the committee, but if they're not turning up, I feel like we need to do some work in that space.
Yeah, the engagement's not working, is it?
And that's why, I know we're making this more complicated, but I'd like the column where we've got our self-assessed what is the percentage effectiveness, because I mean, essentially, we've got an effective policy in place, but we've got 0% in terms of applications, so it's not a control that's working.
So,
And that raises questions.
through you,
about
Mr.
what it-
Chair, it's a good question, and the reply is that the way we looked at it is that for this one here, we had the framework in place, the invites have gone out, we've done the best of our ability. If they do not turn up, but we have a framework in place for that to be facilitated.
There needs to be other engagement around the edges to understand what the inhibitor is to that engagement from their perspective.
So we're not having a crack at staff, we're not having a crack at iwi. We just want to reflect the situation. Yes, Nigel.
Yeah, look, and I have had that conversation in the last sort of week with the chair actually, and the challenges, capacity and capability.
Yeah.
And so.
And it's across the country.
No, yeah,
It's
totally.
just not enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but she wasn't a new chair that's been there for, relatively new, wasn't actually aware of the position sitting around council as well. So, that's probably an interesting challenge for us when a chair changes place to bring them up to speed. But also we're not 100% sure on new changes to legislation, how that would affect that as well. So we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you. And look, just to round out the conversation, I really had two points to finish on. One was Ahmed and John under community engagement, and this is where, interpreting it correctly, I would be just a tad worried. We're in the LTP year, and we've got an engagement framework and an engagement toolbox not implemented. We must be having to implement them this year. I mean, if we're doing the LTP engagement, correct? Aye. Thank you.
Kia ora. So through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. We actually have a community toolbox and framework in formation. It has not yet formally been adopted, so it is very much a work in progress. The initial plan was to have it in place before we started LTP consultations. There's been quite a bit of movement internally that has impacted on that. However, it is in train. I can't give you a time frame around that, though. I apologise.
Look, I mean, we're always engaging with the community, but I'm just thinking here particularly, and again I come back to the 19th of February and then actually 18th of March should be fairer. We've got the CD out there, we've got the whole issue of how do we engage, are we engaging effectively? It would have struck me these controls are pretty important. So I take your point about no deadline, but in my mind there is. It's called the 18th of March.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. But I can also confirm that there is a significance engagement policy that we utilise as the guiding document for all of our engagements. So the toolbox and the framework would be an addendum to that to support how we engage. But I can attest to the fact that the significance engagement policy is the determining factor on the fact that we do engage. So we're not without processes in place.
Brilliant. I notice we've got another ineffective in there as well. Ahmed, one of the other things that I just think I go back to, because I always like my diagrams and I always go back to the heat map. Thank you for that. Go back and on page, whatever the heat map is, I'm not entirely certain that the arrows being horizontal are correct. I think we all know, and it's been apparent for a wee while, that, for instance, legislative reform, if I've read that correctly, is not horizontal. In fact, right at the moment, it's going upwards because of the potential need and impact on how we respond. So I actually think we should have an upwards arrow there against legislative reform. I won't go through the rest. I mean, I think our need to do the climate change is important and relative to it, but whether the risk is changing is another one. But I go back to that legislative reform. That is a significant challenge for us at the moment. It wasn't actually probably 2 or 3 months ago, because we just thought, oh, okay, cool, whatever you'll be. But now that we have a change in government, it becomes really important. John?
Through you, Mr Chair, just a bit of context on this too, if you don't mind. These arrows reflect the changes that are made through the quarterly risk reviews, if there's any change in the status of the risk assessment. I think you're talking a bit more about emerging risks that are coming through. So this is about the quarterly risk review change? Yeah, that's what that's for.
Yeah. I would actually, I mean, I'm not, look to have both, but I think actually we need to recognise, I mean, I think one of the important things, and this is valuable for governors to reflect on, and again, we need to talk about our communication to council. I look at this and say, okay, these are, and I don't have too much trouble with the 12 strategic risks, but is our risk profile becoming more risky, or is it more under control? And I mean, while it might say, well, that doesn't tell me, by the way, but actually I think we need to recognise the environment is tighter. So we've got legislative reform which has a real potential to impact us by Christmas, requiring a response. We have ongoing challenges of recruitment with personnel, and we've talked about with the LTP. In some sense, it's not a new risk. We've well recognised that for a long time, but one senses it's a wee bit tighter when we're needing to fill some key positions. So when I look at that, Nigel, I take it that, you know, things aren't easy, you know, that aren't actually easy for us, or as easy as they could be in the past. We need to be aware of those. I mean, I know the legislative compliance one is just stating the obvious. It's in front of our nose. It's in the paper every day, right at the moment, on the media, right at this moment. But the impact is real for us. You know, it could kill us coming up, and we've got to suddenly try and change things. Right, that's enough of the preaching from me. Thank you for that, Ahmed. Believe it or not, this is a case where more information has been really helpful. I know you were a bit concerned that in giving us you might actually cause us to, I don't know, something. Well, actually what it's caused us to do is to have a very useful discussion. And perhaps, Nigel, outside of this, I might give you a call. I think we should have a discussion about actually how does council become better aware of actually what is our risk environment, which would be useful. One thing I wanted to acknowledge, because it comes up elsewhere, Ahmed, is can we make certain we devote good time to your risk management improvement plan, which you said you'll bring back in March? Really interested in that, so thank you that you're doing that.
That's what will be in March meeting.
Okay, can we move to the motion, please, that we receive the report? I'll move that from the chair to have a seconder, please. Thank you, Nigel. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right, folk, I need to stick to my time scale, which I sense is slipping, but I said let's have a break at 10:30. Can we have a break for